So I definitely don't want to make a habit of this, but ironically, the timing has worked out just perfect. The last 2 times now that I've been up here on stage, had this opportunity, that my wife Emily and I were homeless for both the last 2 times. The reason for that is I shared last time I was up, we just moved into this old 65-year-old house in Georgetown, this real small home, and I was sharing about this adventure that we've been on where one Saturday afternoon, right before I last spoke, there was this horrendous smell that came through our house pretty quick, like the onset was really fast. And sure enough, we walk into our bathroom, and right by the shower drain, there was a small puddle that had formed, which was actually sewage that had backed up, which ultimately, that's not the goal of a shower drain. So we knew we had a problem. And I walked in, I remember it was like walking kind of into the scene of the crime, if you will, and it was, I think, the second worst smell I'd ever experienced in my life, first only to some of your middle school boys in cabins at boot camp each year. But I walked in, looked at it, and I did what I think is at this point like my signature kind of handyman move. I got like a sequence of moves I probably should trademark it at this point. I walked in, and first I fold my arms and I scowl deeply, like I'm thinking real intensely, like there's 5 solutions I may apply here, and I'm just seeing which one I want to use. In reality, I'm just wasting precious minutes of my life that I'll never get back, but I'm looking at it, and then the second thing I usually do is I kick whatever is wrong. So I just give a little boop right on the edge of the shower drain, like that might just suck it all back down, and this never will have happened. And then the third step is usually the most helpful and effective one, and I just Google plumbers near me, right? Because I have no idea what the issue is. I have no idea what's going on. And that's kind of been the journey since I was last on stage, is we basically had a series of professionals. We've had actually 7 out now. I was thinking 7 different fields trying to figure out what is wrong with our house. Now, if you're like, that sounds a little dramatic, a little overkill for a little water backed up, I would agree with you. The problem is each person that's come out to our house has discovered another problem with our old house. So now we've got 3 just totally disconnected things that we're trying to work on, not the least of which is as they started to tear up some of the bathroom, they discovered asbestos throughout the house, which is really cool. I learned a lot about that the last couple months. Basically, WebMD says I'm going to die a very slow, painful death over the course of the next 10 or 20 years as my lungs kind of stab me from the inside out. All the professionals have said it's completely fine. No big deal. It's undisturbed in the ground, but still got to get rid of it now that we're tearing things up and everything, right? So that's why we're not there today. So literally, it's being removed as we speak. We got to move in with my mom, which, not to insult her generosity, it's just not the dream heading into your 7th wedding anniversary, right? It's like, okay, but that's where we are, and that's where we've been displaced. Maybe one of the silver linings is I got this really cool mask this week as we were tearing up floor. I thought kind of made me look like Bane, and I was like, man, look at this thing. I tried to flirt with Emily a little bit, my best Bane impersonation, and she didn't find it that romantic. It wasn't like really her thing. Maybe it had to do with asbestos all around or whatever, but it was fun to wear that. We've had learned a lot of things, a lot of adventures, but the big learning from the last couple months, the thing that I would like summarize it by the most, or we've learned the most, is that it's impossible to fix a problem when you don't know what the problem is in the first place. Right? I won't bore you with all the things that are wrong, but specifically to the plumbing issue. I am actually, I'm embarrassed. I'm frustrated, but I'm embarrassed to share this with you. I shared how we had a plumber out that afternoon, got out quick. It sounded like there was a chainsaw in our bathroom or something. I mean, he's going through like the shower drain, and he's going through the sink and the toilet. I try to unclog all this, and he walks out, and he's like, I've never seen this, but I don't know what's wrong. I can't fix it. And so his supervisor comes out the week after I spoke. He comes out and he puts together that bathroom had been added on later. It had been added on about 40 years after the fact. And so there's a pump outside that moves everything to the main water line. And it had been tripped. We just needed to push a button to turn it back on. Now, I guess I'm grateful because we discovered a whole lot of other things we really do need to deal with. But it didn't matter how much money we would throw at it, how much expertise somebody had, what kind of cool tools were being used. Nothing in the world was going to unclog our pipes because we didn't have clogged pipes. They were backed up because of a pump that needed to be switched back on. And this is a reality of so many areas of life, right? That's a huge issue when we don't know what the problem may be. It's an issue if you have something wrong in your house or something wrong with your car and you don't know what the problem is. That's an issue. It's a problem if it's in your business and you're bleeding cash or you have high turnover or sales have tanked and you're like, what is the problem? I got to get to the bottom of this. Like that's a challenge. It's a problem in a relationship when you don't know what the problem may be. But in this series, I want to deal with what I think is the most foundational one because I think it has the potential to have the most impact and consequence in our lives. And that's talking about the problem on the inside of us. What is wrong with you and me? And the question that I really want us to think deeply about this morning, we're going to think about it over the course of the next 4 weeks, but really today to start it, I want you to really think about this question because I think it's so profound. And it is very simply the tension that kind of rises up is the question of why can't I do what I do what I want to do? Now, this is a totally different question than why can't I do what I should do? Why can't I do the right thing? The right thing usually takes more time, takes more money or effort. The right thing is usually not more fun, at least not in the moment. Most of the people around us aren't doing what they should do and we just go with the crowd. There's all kinds of reasons why we don't do the right thing or what we should do. You don't need me to tell you what you should do. But this is a totally different question. There are things you want to do. You desperately wanted in the morning one thing and you did something totally different in the afternoon. You said this would be the last time. You said, I'm going to start on Monday, and now you find yourself here again. My assumption is there's something you want to stop, perhaps, right? Maybe you just want to stop scrolling endlessly, and you catch yourself, and you're like, that wasn't just checking social media. Like an hour just went by on Facebook, an hour just went by on YouTube or TikTok or whatever it may be. What is that? Like, where did I just go, or where did I just check out to? You want to stop exploding on the people that you love most. Stop getting defensive or reactive and using words that breathe death into the relationships that are most important to you. You want to stop maybe feeling jealousy or negative thoughts or emotions towards other people as you are looking at their lives or on social media or talking bad about people that aren't in the room. You're like, why do I do that? Why is it that I go there? Maybe there's something that you're numbing with that you want to stop. You want to stop pouring a drink that you know is a little too stiff. You know you had one more than you should have. You want to stop turning to pornography. You don't need a verse for that. You know what it's doing to your mind and what's happening in your relationships. You're like, I so desperately want to stop that. Maybe you want to stop overspending. Maybe it's a thing in your parenting you want to stop saying to your kids. Maybe it's a pattern of eating that you want to stop. There's something in us that so desperately wants these things, and yet we can't. What is that? Or maybe you have something you want to start. Maybe you want to start a new habit. Maybe you want to learn a new skill. Maybe you want to start a habit of reading or of journaling. Maybe you want to start spending more time with God. Maybe you want to start prioritizing your personal health and eating better or working out. Maybe you want to start showing up emotionally, feeling again, being present. Maybe you want to start prioritizing your family or the most important relationships in your life, and you continuously, and maybe for years, have been believing, I'll start it tomorrow. I'll start it next Monday. And then every Monday comes and goes and you haven't started, and there's that thing in you. And my assumption is like the things in this category, it's not just like, yeah, that sounds nice. I probably should eat a little more broccoli in my diet or something. I'm saying I think there are things like you desperately want. It feels like you are trapped by what you can't start or what you can't stop. And that is the tension at the heart of the series that we're starting today called Set Free, of is it possible to be set free from those things? Because my other assumption is whatever you can't stop or whatever you can't seem to start, that it's costing you something. It's at least costing you time, energy, money. Maybe it's costing you a relationship. Maybe it's costing you a job or an opportunity or dream or a hope or your reputation. Or maybe you can't specifically point to a cost, but you have that feeling like something innately in you knows that you could be more. And I don't mean like that kind of insecurity we have where like, am I enough? And comparing, I'm not talking about that. That's not today's message. I mean, you know that thing that you can't stop or that thing that you haven't started, you know it's holding you back from the story you want to tell, from the person that God has ultimately created you to be. There's a cost to it. And some of us, I think, want to start or stop desperately. Like you would pretty much at this point throw any amount of money at it if you knew there was a foolproof solution. You would take any amount of steps if you knew it was going to work. Some of you have wanted to start or stop for so long, that it honestly just feels hopeless at this point. Like maybe you haven't said it out loud, but you've kind of thrown in the towel. You're just like, this is the way things are. This is the way I am. Nobody's perfect. I mean, you just can't sit in that disappointment day after day, that shame again and again and again. So you'd rather just kind of coast or go neutral or just deal with it or manage some of the symptoms because you've just kind of been convinced this is how it's going to be. And I want this series to breathe life back into that conversation. Whether you've been frustrated in the last 10 minutes with something that I brought up or whether it's been 70 years that you've been battling something, I want to breathe life and hope back into that conversation today because I believe whatever the start or stop is, or the combination of starts and stops, it is absolutely possible to be set free. In fact, I've been so excited about this series for so long because it's a very personal series to me. I remember when I was 17, I showed up to Northpoint for the first time. This was my first time in church in about 10 years. And I sat through this content, similar content to this. We're going to be spending the next 4 weeks in a couple of different chapters in the letter of Romans. And I remember sitting in it, and it was just like, I didn't get a new list of homework or another list of to-dos. It was like I saw different colors. Like I saw the world in a different light. It was a perspective. Like I just didn't know. I just didn't know what was possible. I'd never experienced that before. A few years later, we taught a similar series, and it was the first series that I ever had the opportunity to preach, to be on stage and share my heart about. And I promise you it was confusing and made no sense to people, and people were so kind that they came back to Northpoint. But I was passionate. I mean, I was excited because it's impacted me so personally. And every year when we do kind of our calendaring for the next year and talk about content, what kind of series and what passages, every year this kind of concept, it makes the list. And we're like, it's been 10 years. We want to have the conversation. It's a different world that we are living in. Most people with us are new. Like, let's go to this incredibly foundational concept. If you are new to church, then this series may seem a little confusing. It may seem a little too spiritual, something like that. I think for you, maybe this is just one potential explanation of the problem. Like if you would admit there's something in me I can't start or can't stop, and I haven't seemed to figure out what the problem is. Like you have some theories, but you haven't figured out the solution yet. Maybe this is just one potential explanation for you that you can kind of explore and navigate. If you are a follower of Christ, I think this is the problem and this is the solution that we're talking about in this series. But the reality is, this series, as much as any that we would do, it's like 4 parts of one continuous movie. We do some series where they're kind of like one-offs, they stand alone, you can send a message to a friend, it's helpful. This one, like today, it's almost going to feel like a cliffhanger. I'm just talking about the problem today. I'm not even going to move towards the solution today. You're going to be maybe like at the end frustrated, like, what? You stop? Why? Like, that's not helpful. But it's one continuous movie. We can't keep you for a couple hours here this morning. But we're going to focus on the problem. And we're going to read what I think is the most relatable passage of Scripture. I remember when I was 17, I had this perception that the Bible was just confusing. It was hard to read. It was archaic. It didn't make any sense. I'd never read it. That was just, what people had told me. And I remember reading Romans 7 for the first time, and I remember getting emotional because it was like Paul was reading my mind. It was like he stole from my journal, but I know he wrote it first. There was like this experience as I had reading it. And so maybe for you still have a tough time trusting the Bible, but you could at least walk away today saying, I saw something that I related with that described me. So here's how he kind of describes the problem first, and then we'll get to the root of the problem a little bit further in. In Romans 7:15, Paul says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. He's saying, I don't know why I do the things I do, and because I can't even trust me, because I'm different on Sunday to Monday to Tuesday, morning to evening, like I can't trust my gut. I need some kind of standard. We need some kind of law, some kind of absolute to hold me accountable, to point to what's good, what's true, what's right, because I know I can't trust me. He continues, and he says, for I have the desire to do what is good, like that is genuine, that is real, it's in us, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. This is the passage that I said for me was so incredibly relatable. There's another translation that says, not just I don't understand what I do, it says I do not understand me. I don't know what's inside of me. It's like there's 2 of me. And again, we have some theories about what it might be. You've tried some solutions. You've managed some symptoms, but we still haven't quite cracked the code. In the next verse, he starts to introduce more to the core of what is the root of the problem. He introduces a phrase that is often confusing, often misdefined, and I want to talk about it at length here today. But in the next verse, he says, "Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it." Now, Paul's not trying to shirk his responsibility or say it's not my fault or anything, but he's saying that there is something inside of him that is stronger than him, and he's acknowledging that that's true. In fact, for you and I, the way that we usually define this word is we usually want like a list, right? Like we want the verb sin. How far can I go without actually sinning? We want to get close to the line. We want to know if something is a sin. And he's talking about it like it's a noun. And I know based on your church background or experience, this is a word that can be, carry a lot of shame, carry a lot of guilt, carry a lot of confusion. But he's simply saying, no, sin is living outside of God's design, right? Like he designed you, he made you, he loves you. And so his commands are simply what is best for you. Whenever we live outside of his design, we're inevitably hurting ourselves, we're hurting others, we're damaging, we're destroying, whether that's a relationship or a reputation or a hope or dream or just our peace. But he's not talking about it like it's a verb. He's saying there's this thing inside of us that has infected us. It's in us, it's a force, it's a power, and it is stronger than us, that there is absolutely something warring against you. Look how he describes it in the very next verse, kind of the implications or the weight of it. He says in verse 21 through 23, he says, "I have discovered this principle of life." He's like, it's a truism of life for all of us, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. Like it's just a principle. We need to admit that's going to happen for us. I love God's law with all my heart, but there's another power within me that is at war with my mind. There is something in me that is warring against the person that I want to be, actively undoing the story that I'm trying to create and tell. And it's powerful, and it's in me. And he says it's living. See, this is why I think so many of our self-help kind of tools, and I'm not against a lot of that stuff. I read a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's very helpful, but why it all just kind of falls in a category of managing symptoms. Because what Paul would say is it's like a lot of our kind of tools to manage, the symptoms is like, it's like taking ibuprofen when you just got a cancer diagnosis. And this is the only strategy you're going to apply. And maybe it'll take a little pain away or manage, a fever, but it's not doing anything to deal with the root of the problem. And he's saying so much of the struggle for Christians and non-Christians alike, this isn't just like a faith, this is all people. So much of the struggle is we're trying to fix symptoms. We're not trying to fix the root of the problem. Now, I want to go back a couple of chapters to really set the scene and context for this, because this is where I think it really gets insightful. He tells us where this comes from and how and why it's so deeply infiltrated our lives, and I think it brings a lot of clarity to why we do what we do. In Romans 5, he kind of starts setting up the stage this way. He says, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly." While we were still powerless over our sin, there was nothing we can do about it. We fight and we struggle and we outsmart, we outspend and we outwork, but ultimately we have no power for it. At just the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Now, ungodly, that could be kind of our second speed bump term. I don't mean to offend anybody. It's just we don't use that language, right? We don't describe ourselves that way. We say, I'm not perfect. Very simply, God is perfect. All major worldviews, religions see him that way. God is perfect. We are not perfect. Therefore, we are unlike God. We are all ungodly, right? We're in it together. In fact, just to make sure we're coming at this conversation from the same place, just tell the person you came with right now, you are so ungodly. Just tell them that. Maybe somebody around you. Okay. Just one person. Just one person. Don't have too much fun with it. Okay. Just to make sure we're all coming to this conversation from the same spot. He said, it's just the right time, right? Christ died for us. What he says is unique. It's unique to Christ, right? Because in 7, he gives more clarity. He says, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person. Though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. Sure, like the best of us, the best of society, absolutely, in moments of incredible bravery and selflessness, people die to protect others, those they care for their country, absolutely. But he's saying Christ died when we were actively against him, when we were enemies, when we were actively sinning against him, Christ died for us. In verse 8, he says, when God demonstrates his own love for us in this, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And think about the context for Paul. When Jesus was on the cross, Paul was alive. While Paul was on the planet, this isn't just us kind of transporting ourselves back to this, knowing he died before it. He's no, Paul was actively sinning. He was actively rebelling against God, and Jesus knew that and still died for him. Think of the weight of that for Paul. And then he talks about where this came from, where it started to infiltrate this weight of sin that required the death of Christ. He says it came from an individual, from a person. There's a starting point. When Adam sinned, we'll talk about Adam in a second. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. He's saying there was a time when sin hadn't entered the world yet. And Adam and Eve, the first people, they had the opportunity. Do we want to trust God or do we want to go our own way? I know Adam and Eve can be a big pill to swallow, especially based on kind of where you come from. For us, we would just say Jesus referred to them as real people, as literal people, so we just kind of go with whatever Jesus says, right? Even if you have to think about them as, the first people or whatever it might be, his point is that there was a decision that was made. And who knows if we would have made the same decision. Probably we all would have done the exact same thing. But Adam and Eve, they get the blame for it. And as a result, sin, the noun, the force, the virus, the cancer, it entered the world. And he's saying, as a result, you and I, we were all born in Adam. There's a default mode. There's a default way of operation. There's something that we have inherited. And we have this train that is the weight of human history behind us, right? Like we have to know what we've inherited from generations that have come before us, like the world that we're living in. And he's saying it's in us. And it may not be fair, but it's true. It's something we were born with. It's something that we're inherited. So you and I were all born in Adam. And what's true of Adam, when the DNA of Adam has been passed down to us. So just to have some fun with this, because I feel like it's kind of a heavy, message where I just say we're all messed up. I just want to have a little fun. I'm going to start with me, okay? There's me with a smile, okay? Jordan in Adam, okay? I'll go first. Born in sin. And then I think it's just helpful to put a Sooner and an Aggie in there next at the bottom of the barrel with me, okay? We have Buck, and I don't know if you can see, but I drew his hair because it felt like a bald buck. Made no sense. And so Buck, our lead pastor, in sin. Here is my mother. Here's my father in sin. My sweet wife, Emily. I'm just going to set her right there for a second. Okay, babe. All right. My one and only brother in sin, for sure. Entire UT football program since 2009 in sin, right? Like, we just keep going. Mother Teresa, right? I mean, Billy Graham, just all people in sin, right? This is the whole world. See if we get any running away snow. This is the whole world born in sin, and as a result, we've inherited this. Like if you had a newborn and they were so cute and sweet and photographed so well, and you're like, oh, this is great, and then they turn 2, and you're like, what happened to them? Paul's like, I know what happened to them. I'll never forget my 8th birthday. I had a Harry Potter birthday cake that my mom had picked up in the morning, and sometime in between the morning and we actually blew out the candles, there was this gigantic face print that made it in the middle of the cake. Somebody had just, boom, shoved their face right in it, right? So go to my 4-year-old brother, and he's got frosting in his eyebrow, a little up his nose, all over his shirt, which is ironic because if you know Jeremy personally, he doesn't eat all that different today as an adult, right? So it started young. But all over him, we go up to him, we're like, hey, buddy, cake, it's kind of messed up. Was that you? And he goes, nope. Wasn't me. You don't have to teach kids that, right? Like they just know. You never train them that. It's in all of us. He said there's an operating mode. There's a way of thinking. There's a pattern to this world. There's a way that we cope with our struggles and our pains that is all in Adam. And as long as we're trying to fix and control and outsmart and outwork, we're following that same pattern, and we will always lose because it has power over us. But then he contrasts that. Sorry, babe. I'm going to put her right in there too. Okay. Then he contrasts that with another opportunity, another way, a different mode of operation. And he says that the gift, that there's a great difference between Adam's sin and God's gracious gift. He hasn't used that language yet. He hasn't talked about that. You're right. This is something new. There's something that stands in stark contrast. So what is this other way? What is the gift? He says, if the many died by the trespass of the one man, One sin broke relationship, sin entered the world, and death has resulted since. If the many have died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift, something we didn't earn or deserve, and the gift that came by the grace of the one man who stands in contrast to Adam, the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? That there's another opportunity, that there's another way, that there's another path, that there's another power available to us, that there's a different operating system. He starts clarifying what he means, and he contrasts the two in a couple verses in a row here. He says, the judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation as a result. You could argue that it's not fair, but it's true. But the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. Also not fair, but so grateful that it is true. Look what he says in the next verse. He says, for the sin of this one man, Adam, caused death to rule over many, but even greater is God's wonderful grace and his gift of righteousness. For all who receive it will live in triumph over sin and death through this one man, Jesus Christ. I highlighted live in triumph because this is not a heaven and hell conversation. If you're like, I know where this is going, I've grown up in church, I get it, I've prayed the prayer, that's not what we're talking about. That's not what Paul is writing about here. He's not talking about heaven someday. He's not talking about Jesus as an insurance policy. He's saying there is a mode of operation, there is a power available to you right now that is also stronger than you, and it's way stronger than the thing that has had a grip over you. That when you place your trust, I'll start with Emily, I'll go to her first. When you start and you place your trust in Christ, there's a new set of truths that are now true about you. And instead of what's being true of Adam being passed down to you, it's like Christ undid what Adam did. And now what's true of Christ becomes true of you. This is about life now. This is about a power that's available to you the moment that you place your weight, you place your trust, you place your confidence in Christ. It affects our actions and decisions today. See, this is why Christianity is so much different than the normal pattern of religion, right? All religion, that's why religion is so irresistible. Religion is just, you're supposed to, you don't, you're toast. All of them, every single one of them follow that pattern. Here's the set of rules, we don't follow them, you're done for. But unfortunately, we've twisted Christianity a little bit, and for some of us, and certainly culture at large, we see Christianity this way. I put it in quotes because I don't think it's real Christianity, but it's just a small twist. It's struggle to make God happy. Here's these things that we think we're supposed to do, but then we disappoint him, and we constantly feel full of shame and guilt as a result. But hey, here's the twist. You do get to go to heaven when you die. You do have the insurance policy. Isn't that great? See, this is unattractive. This is like life is just one long, great struggle, and then you transport to some alternate universe. That is not faith. That's not Christianity. That's not the power that's available to you. He says triumph in life right now, and most of us just didn't know. We just prayed a prayer, and it was an authentic prayer. Like, I'm not mocking that, but we just thought that was about heaven someday and had no idea about the identity switch that became true of us in that moment. In verse 18 and 19, he kind of summarizes all of his points. He says, consequently, Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God, and there it is, the concept again, and new life for everyone. Yes, right relationship. Yes, we can go to heaven someday, but and new life. It's like you're made new. It's like you're reborn. It's what's true of Christ now becomes true of you. For just as, in his final summary, for just as through the disobedience of the one man, he made a decision, and there's terrible consequence as a result. Therefore, through the disobedience of the one man, the many were made sinners. So also through the obedience of the one man, the many will be made righteousness. Because of the faithfulness of the one man, because of the act on the cross of the one man, many will be made righteous. Now, could it be possible that just because you pray a prayer and you transfer your trust to Christ, could it be possible that because the weight of human history is still behind you here, because you were born in this, because this is what you're used to, because today what we know about the brain, you've literally built patterns in your neurological network that are designed to operate this way because you've exercised it for so long, could it be possible that you default to this mode of thinking? Well, of course. Does this mean it just loses all power over you in an instant? Well, of course you're still going to struggle with this way of thinking, especially if you try to continue to operate this way. especially if you try to outwork it or out-willpower it or out-read it or outspend it or just have enough discipline or character or energy or whatever it may be. That's all the old way. So of course, these coping mechanisms are going to be available to us. Of course, this is going to be how we can still view and see the world and see people if we don't know all that's just become true of us. Yeah. And that's the heart of this series. We just didn't know. And so we continue to operate out of this old way, even though there's so much new that is available and accessible to us. We're not talking about the solution here today. I warned that up front. We're just talking about the problem in part one, because I'm convinced that if you don't know what the problem is in the first place, it will be impossible to fix it. So the applications, they're not broad in this one. There's not a lot to it. Hopefully it's not too offensive to you, because I know that I don't know all of you, but you see my heart behind it. The first part of the application would be, would you just be willing to admit that you have a problem? For some of you, this is no big deal. You're very aware of the thing you're fighting and struggling against. You've been warring against it for a long time. For others of us, this is a tougher step. For some of us, we're like, nobody's perfect. Like, we've kind of minimized our problem. I'm doing the best I can. Like, we've kind of shrunk the problem. And I'm asking you to say, like, no, would you acknowledge, like, there is a force inside of you that is stronger than you, that is more powerful than you, that is warring, according to Paul, like warring against the person that you want to be, against the story that you want to tell, against the type of faith that you want to one day have. That is significant. That's serious. I came across this one experiment that was done with these 10 CEOs of big companies, major corporations, and they would be the guys, right, that like we would watch on YouTube videos. They would be the guys that it's like, man, how do you do that? How do you get up at 4 a.m. and how are you so disciplined and you eat so well and you work out and you've been so successful and how do you fit all that into your day? Like if anybody could go fix themselves and just be disciplined enough, like it would be these guys, right? But then they were asked for 4 days, for an extended weekend, for a 4-day weekend to not do any work. And then also, they weren't allowed access to any coping mechanisms, so they couldn't binge watch anything on Netflix. They couldn't, drink any alcohol. They had a set of things. They kind of just had to be at this retreat. The experiment said that every single one of the 10, by day 3, or the third afternoon, this troop of dynamic, high-rolling superachievers was depressed. They were in touch with their emptiness and loneliness. They would be the guys that's like, no, this message is for weak-minded people. I can figure it out. Nope. It's all of us. And maybe the more successful you are, the smarter you are, the more talented you are, the more hardworking you are, you can just delay the inevitable. But if you can't see it yet, I promise you somebody that knows you can. They can see. Maybe it's not a discipline thing as much as a showing up thing, a being vulnerable thing, a liking yourself thing. We've all got a thing. So my first ask is to admit, would you just say you have a problem? Of course, I would say, admit you have a sin problem, but however you'd, phrase it or word it for you, would you admit you have a problem? The second is to say, would you acknowledge you are powerless over the problem? And this is a lot harder for us because we may intellectually say, yeah, I'm following you today, I get it. And I'm saying, no, you kind of have to experience that you're powerless. It's an active choice to surrender, to say, I can't do it anymore. I just say that because I know what the experience is like personally. You're probably going to know if you've really made that decision, if what you feel is this incredible paradox, these contradictory feelings of terror and peace and lightness like you've never felt all at the same time. Because the experience is to say, it's terrifying to admit I can't fix it. Somebody else has to, or I'm toast. That's terrifying to be. I can't outsmart it. I can't figure it out. I can't outwork it. And so incredibly freeing to be, it's not going to be my responsibility if this ever changes. I can't do it. I need help outside of myself. If you think about AA, it's statistically the most successful program that we've known. 87 years it's been around now, helping people overcome destructive habits and behaviors, right? And when you look at the famous 12 steps, it has very little to actually do with alcohol, way more about thought patterns and behaviors and relationships and so on. And I think about step 1 that you can't get anywhere until step 1 you acknowledge is this. It's we admitted we were powerless, they would say, over alcohol, right? Of course, that's the specific struggle they're managing. We admitted we were powerless over blank, whatever the struggle is for you, that our lives had become unmanageable. At some point, we have to admit, yeah, next Monday is going to be no different. tomorrow's gonna be no different. Like there is a power over me that I don't have power over. And then third, specifically to this week, so for the next 7 days, my ask would be, can you just pay attention to the problem? Again, this isn't the solution today, right? We're not getting to that yet. So my ask is, this week, when you find yourself and you're like, I did just scroll for an hour. If you want to freak yourself out, look at your screen time report on your phone, right? Like that wasn't checking my phone. Like I just checked out for a while. When you find yourself reacting or exploding on people that you love, that you take a bullet for, and yet you're saying these kind of words to them. When you go to whatever your numbing mechanism of choice is, would you just notice that something's there? That this is not all made up. That there really is something inside of you that you have no power over. I think you can do whatever you want to do. We're talking about the solution next week. I'm just saying, would you notice it? And my hope is next Sunday you'd almost come a little on edge. You'd be a little frustrated, maybe angry with me, and then Buck can resolve all the solution for you in part 2. But would you just notice it's there, it's big, it's real? And then perhaps in part 2, we can move forward and talk about what it really looks like to be free, that it is possible. There's a future reality that the thing that has a grip on you doesn't have to have a grip on you anymore, that the thing is holding you back doesn't have to hold you back anymore, but that there really is a way forward, that you really can be set free. Would you guys pray with me? Father, there's a lot to this concept. For some of us, this is something we feel like we heard before, but there's a twist. There's something we didn't know. There's a reality that we haven't experienced yet. And ask that you would clarify for that for us. God, for others of us, this is a really big conversation. We got a lot of questions. We got a lot of pushbacks. And I just ask that you would meet us in every single one of those. That you desire us to live a life that is set free, to step into the story that you have for us. And it's only possible with and through you. So, Father, would you meet us here with these next couple of weeks? And I'm so excited to see the stories that result. We love you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Thank you guys so much for being here, tuning in. Have a great, safe Halloween tomorrow. We'll see you for part 2 next week.